Louisiana Legends is made possible by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. This important program series enables us to discover, through the accomplishments of our fellow Louisianians, the unique character of a state so proudly served by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana for 60 years.
I'm with Governor Edwin Edwards for the second part of this very special Louisiana Legends. And Governor, again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Gus.
What's Edwin Edwards' greatest accomplishment as governor? When it's all said and done, not what the historians are going to say, what do you say is your greatest accomplishment?
In part, it contributed to my undoing, the independence of the legislature. When I got here in 1972, the legislature had no offices, no fiscal advisors, no staff, no telephones. They were totally disorganized, but we began a process of modernizing the legislature, and as a result, it is a very independent body today. So much so that it's almost impossible for the governor to work with them. And that is a legacy which I have left, because while I think when I'm governor, it's good for the governor to be able to control the legislature, because I know what I'm doing, and my opinion is that what I think is good for the state is good for the state. It concerns me that someone less capable than I, and this is a prejudiced viewpoint, but it concerns me that some other person would become governor and would not have the check and balance of an independent legislature. And that, of course, is a direct result of my efforts to modernize the legislature, and is in part a legacy from the new Constitution, which we wrote in 1973.
Will there ever be a strong governor again?
No.
Not in this state?
The times and circumstances and the independence of the legislature and single member districts do not lend themselves to strong governors, because if a legislator had to run from a parish or a large district where there was a mix of people, it would be easier to work with him. But you get these districts that are single member, and it's all Republicans, or all conservatives, or all liberals, and all Democrats, and the legislator has to respond to the will of the people in that district, and there's very little room for compromise.
Governor, how do you feel about comparisons to Huey Long, which are certainly being made, and I think in time will be made even more so?
I'm flattered by them, although, as you know, because you're a student of the Longs, we're totally different in our approach to government. The things that he was able to do and say at the time he was governor would be impossible today, because you have an independent legislature and you have the coverage of the press, and it's just impossible to do and say what he did. We have to use different methods, but our goals were the same. What were the goals? And I like to say it rather tryly, to comfort the afflicted and not afflict the comfortable.
So someday, if there's a statue on the other side of the Capitol, it would be okay of Edwin Edwards?
At this point in my life, if you ask me what I would like as the last legacy or the last tribute that the people of this state would give to me, it would be to be buried on the Capitol grounds, adjacent to or facing his statue. Now, that's a rather macabre statement for me to make, but I've thought about that many times when I walk in that garden and I look at his statue, and I think of the reverence that the people of this state have for him, although he, at the time he was governor, was far more controversial than I am. If you think that's possible, I know it is possible because I've studied it, but in time people begin to realize that what we were about was about people and those that needed us rather than those that did not need us.
Governor, when you read these terrible statistics that from time to time surface about this state, putting us at the bottom of this list or that list, how does it affect you?
Well, it doesn't affect me as much as people as it affects other people, because there's a lot of irrelevance to those stats. We are a complex state. We have a high percentage of minorities, about 25 to 30%. We have a high percentage of Hispanics. We have a high percentage of Cajun people. We have a number of what we call white Protestant Americans, and we are a mix. What's never pointed out is how well we get along together and how we contribute to each other and help each other. When other states in the past 30 years have gone through horrible racial strife, we've managed to put it together here. I mean, there's a feeling of camaraderie and understanding and pleasantness about people in Louisiana, which is far more important than all these other stats. Now, let me make a confession to you. Another thing is, we have a higher percentage of so-called underground economy here. There are a number of farming, cattle raising, fur trapping, fishing, oystering, crawfishing. All those things involve a lot of money involving cash. And unlike states that have everybody working in a factory or a plant where his or her salary is documented on a computer, people in Louisiana have a much higher standard of living based upon the actual facts as compared to the stats that are shown in these surveys, because of the fact that we live in still a rather rural society, particularly in South Louisiana and north central Louisiana. And a lot of people live off of the farm, live off of their gardens, live off of fishing and hunting, and that's income to them, and it raises their standard of life, but it isn't reflected in these stats that are published, which just show the gross revenue of people who are working for a living at some dismal job on an assembly line.
If you had a single regret of something you have not been able to accomplish as governor, what would that be?
I think that the single thing that I regret the most is that we have never been able to convince the majority of people in Louisiana that putting money in early childhood development was a good investment. Not only is it good from a humane standpoint, but it saves money in the long run. It cuts down on teenage pregnancies, it cuts down on prison records, it cuts down on unemployment lines, it cuts down on welfare lines. It makes it possible for people to get the best education possible. And for every dollar we spend when the child is 4, 5, 6 years old, you save $5 down the line in reduced cost, dropout rates, and all these other things that I've talked about. But because that's a long-range program and is not visible or tangible, like building a bridge or building a building, it's hard to convince legislators that a majority of the people of the state are willing to pay taxes to put money in those kind of programs.
Governor, as we've done these two interviews, I must tell you, you sound very disheartened about the legislature.
Well, I have a concern about the growing animosity that a minority, and I emphasize that word, a minority of the legislature has about the plight of people. And these are legislators that come from affluent districts where people are comfortable, they have air-conditioned homes, air-conditioned offices, air-conditioned automobiles, and they bring that attitude to Baton Rouge and have a disdain or unconcern or lack of concern for the plight of the poor and the disadvantaged and sick people and hungry people and people who are unemployed. And it's awfully difficult to get those people to rise to the occasion, knowing that that is not a concern of their constituents back home. It should be their concern as a legislator who is concerned about the overall good of this state, because when we make the life of one person better, it helps everybody, including the comfortable people in these affluent districts.
If you were just starting out and you were going to run for governor this time, what would be the major planks in your platform?
Well, the buzzword today is violent crime. And I think the person that can address that issue is going to have a leg up on his opponents. But I want to point out, we're just going through a violent crime session, and it's almost impossible to get this legislature to really address the root causes of crime. Everybody wants to do it on the penalty side and not address the prevention side. And again, because that's a long time in coming. But if we spent a couple of $100 million providing better education, better child care centers, better help for disadvantaged people, summer employment for disadvantaged youth, drug rehabilitation and counseling centers, more parole officers, we would more than pay for that in reduced insurance rates, safer neighborhoods, lowered prison cell cost, and lowered social cost in developing a better people. But once again, it takes vision and compassion and guts to stand up for that kind of thing, because it doesn't evidence itself immediately. It takes time for the results to show.
Who were the political influences in your life when you were coming up?
Probably more than anybody else, Franklin Roosevelt. And then, of course, Huey Long and the populist theory that he espoused, that government should serve people, not just the influential and the powerful.
Talk to me about the barriers that existed in that time, and now it's forgotten. Catholics and Catholic Cajuns did not get elected governor of Louisiana.
Well, sure, I was the first one in the history of our state, because prior to that time, the Cajun South, Louisiana, divided itself between the two runoff candidates. North Louisiana, in those days, mostly Protestant and white, solidly backed one candidate, and that tipped the balance in his favor. What happened then, of course, a number of things came on to my advantage. Number one, starting in 1965, blacks began to register and vote, which began to upset the strong conservative hold that the whites had in North Louisiana. And then there was an ecumenical movement around the world, headed by the Pope and the Catholic Church, and the Protestant churches began to come together, and this antagonism that once existed began to evaporate. You know, when Earl Long was running in 1940 against Hale Boggs up in North Louisiana, he made a big to-do about the fact that people said Hale Boggs was a communist. And he went on to defend Hale Boggs by saying, but of course that's impossible, and I'm here to defend him because Hale Boggs could not be a communist. The Pope won't let him. Because in those days, in 1940, it was worse being a Catholic in some parts of North Louisiana than being a communist. All that has changed now. And I happened to come along just about that time in history and took advantage of it. Besides, I have a name which is not French Catholic, it's Edwards, and on occasion I can change my accent. And
I've never heard that.
when I went up to North Louisiana, in those days, I tried to be less obvious as a Cajun, but then I capitalized on it in South Louisiana because, unlike other candidates, I didn't run away from it, I capitalized on it.
There's been a remarkable, perhaps the most remarkable political relationship in my lifetime, and it is the love that the African American community has for you and you for that community. You've held on to it through thick and thin, through bad polls and bad times and body blows. How do you account for that affinity? What?
Well, I like to tell you they owe it to me. It goes back to my career. As a lawyer in Crowley, I was an advocate of the poor and the disadvantaged and black people. I treated them with respect and dignity. I had the first non-segregated waiting room in a law office in that part of the state way back in 1949 when I first went to Crowley. I helped on a ticket elect the two first black elected officials in the South in Reconstruction in my hometown of Crowley, David May and Joe Pete, and served with them for 8 years. Then when I got to the Senate in 1964, I helped kill the State Sovereignty Commission and the Un-American Activities Committee, which were committees spending public money just to do bad things to black people. And then when I went to Congress, I was one of 3 members of Congress from the South to vote for the extension of the Voting Rights Act. And then I appointed the first black postmaster in a racially mixed community. And then I brought blacks into meaningful levels of state government in 1972 and have always involved them and brought them into the inner circle. I thought it was important not only to them but to the people of this state, because otherwise we would have gone through the machinations and agony that other states did because they failed to recognize the necessity and the validity of treating blacks with equality and dignity.
You're very proud, obviously.
I'm very proud of that, because while it's easy now and everybody who runs for governor picks it up as a theme, I did it when it was new and difficult and hard and took a lot of criticism for it, but it was the right thing to do.
Governor, as you look back over the years as this state's chief executive, and I know now you're a thoughtful man, those things are going through your mind, the stress, the pain, the worry, the agony, was it worth it?
Yes, it was worth it because I've validated something that's very precious in America, and that is opportunities are available for everybody without regard to their humble status in life or where they come from, what their religion is, or their accent. And I'm an unbelievable example of how great it is to live in America. And what's important is not that it happened to me, but that it can happen to anybody's child.
Governor, y'all were very poor people in Avoyelles Parish, and sharecroppers, which I'm sure was at the bottom of every barrel.
Sure.
That didn't crush you, though, and I know people, for example, people who went through the Depression, who were crushed and never overcame it. To you, was that instead a motivation?
It was a motivation to me, and I just wanted to remove myself from this cycle of poverty which had haunted my parents and grandparents on both sides as long as anyone could remember. And I was the first person in my family to get a college education. I was the first professional person, an attorney, and I'm the only one to have been significantly involved in politics.
While you lived this childhood life and so on, were you aware just how poor you all were?
No, because we did not have television, and we could not see how the other people were living. We lived in a community, everybody was like we were.
Everyone was poor.
None of us had electric lights, we all had outdoor privies. We had to put the milk and the buttermilk in a cistern to keep it cool and keep it from souring. We washed clothes by hand. We farmed by hand with mules and wagons and plows. And we did not know what was happening in the rest of the world. And we were more or less striving to survive in an environment that haunted us all. But it taught me early on that all of us in this same situation were subject to the same thing. We were suffering from poor education, poor job opportunities, poor health service, and the things that have continued to haunt too many people for too long. And that's why much of my career has been built in trying to lift those opportunities.
It seems to me that at some point, a man with your intellect, it must have occurred, though, we are breaking our backs, wearying our souls, working someone else's land, because it was not your land. Is that correct?
Sure, and my father used to lament that, but he would always say that at least we have someone's land to work, and when we gave a third or a fourth of the crop at the end of the year, we always gave an honest count, because my father was a very, very honest person, and his reputation was that way. And it's one of the things that really bothers me, you know, because I know where I am. I've dealt with thousands of people as a lawyer, as a politician, and as a businessman. Not a single human being, alive or dead, can ever say that I mistreated them in a deal or took advantage of them, because I'm basically a very honest person. And it bothers me that all these newspapers and all these people walk around talking about how dishonest I am because I happen to be in politics. And I had hoped that through the year, with all the investigations, all the efforts made to entrap me and to embarrass me, that people would finally wake up one day and say, hey, there must be something right about this fella, otherwise all these efforts made to entrap him would have borne fruit. It's better, I think, for me to say that I've been through all this and have come through it blameless than to have never been subject to the investigations, because then you'd have to take my word for it. Now you don't have to take my word. You can see the results of efforts of hundreds of people who were motivated to try to prove something bad about me.
How difficult will it be for anybody to be elected? Much less not 4 terms, but 2 terms.
I don't see that as happening anytime in the foreseeable future. Incidentally, I said that in 1987 when Roma was elected. I said, he'll never be reelected. 2 reasons. 1, the circumstances, and 2nd, his own personality. But I don't think it's possible anymore, given the nature of the problem and the independence of the legislature, for a governor to be reelected, and I'd be surprised if that happens in my lifetime.
Governor, when you and I came to Baton Rouge in 1964, you as a young senator, I as John McKithen's executive secretary, I think there were only two caucuses in the legislature, the rural and the city caucus.
That's
that
right.
was it. And now there's a caucus for virtually
For everything, everything. You know, there's a woman's caucus, a rural caucus, an Acadiana caucus, a North Louisiana caucus, independent caucus, a black caucus, a Orleans caucus, a big city caucus, a small city caucus. I don't know how those legislators have a chance to go to the legislative meetings. They've got so many caucus meetings. And I'm not saying it's bad, but I mean, it's just like every little group of more than two people has a separate caucus, and sometimes that inhibits the legislative process, in my judgment.
All right, let's go down the road and speculate with me. The next governor who follows you is elected. And you don't care for him or her. It's a possibility it's both. Is there any possibility that Edwin Edwards will come forth?
No.
Again, there is not.
No, I appreciate you asking, and I know some people will treat this with disbelief, but I will never again run for governor of Louisiana. I've done my part. I've had my share. I've appreciated the opportunity of serving, but I think in fairness to the people and fairness to myself that it's time for me to leave that part of my life alone.
Governor, you really love this state, though, don't you?
I really do.
I can tell that's not just...
I really do. I love this state and I love this country.
Governor, I want you to help me be literary for just a moment. Write your epitaph for me. Take your time.
Well,
He was. I'll help you start it.
He was controversial, but you knew where he stood.
You like that, huh?
I like that. I'm very, very proud of that. I mean, people who deal with me know that I tell it like it is. Members of the legislature who hate my guts will tell you, well, at least if he tells you something, you can go to bed on. You can set it to rest. We used to say go to the banks, but that's not good anymore.
No.
And I think that's very important because lawyers and politicians run the peculiar risk of procrastinating or being untruthful. And it meant a great deal to me not to get into that trap. And whether people believe it or not, I can tell you I have not gotten into the trap. And I can also tell you, to my severest critic out there, if you'll ask somebody who has dealt with me one-on-one, knows me, you can't find a person who'll say otherwise. Now, I know a lot of people who've never met me judge me otherwise, and I understand that because of the criticism that I've taken from the press. But they are as wrong as they can be, and I'm very confident in the fact that the people that do in fact know me know better.
You think history will judge you fairly?
Yes,
This is after the youngest critic has died, and we're all out of the way.
I think in time, yes, because I know what was happening to Huey Long when he was governor, and look how history judges him now. And I know that I was far less controversial, and I really got more done than he did. For a lot of reasons, I was in a lot longer and had more opportunities, and the state was emerging and capitalized on some of the things that he did. So I have to assume that when I'm fairly analyzed, you know, without regard to politics and personalities, the record of my achievement will serve me very well.
Governor, on behalf of Louisiana Public Television, and we've waited for a long time to have these programs, but as long as you were governor, or a possibility that you would seek the office for an unprecedented fifth time, obviously we could not ask you to come on here. I think that your interview has been very, very forthright. I must tell you, you still have us totally intrigued about this other assignment after the governor's office.
Well, I'll break it on public television. Incidentally, Beth Courtney, who runs the public television, will tell you that but for me, there'd be no public television in Louisiana today.
I'm very aware of that.
And that's something, you know, nobody votes for me because it's public television, but it is very important. You know, I remember when Sesame Street was a controversial program that was...
Communist.
That's right, that was criticized severely by elements in Louisiana as being communist. And yet it was very important to the education of our children at that age. And, you know, nobody votes for me because I helped make public television what it is today, but that's a intangible of great value to the people.
It's civilization,
That's
Governor.
right.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
sir.
Gus. Thank you.
Louisiana Legends is made possible by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. This important program series enables us to discover, through the accomplishments of our fellow Louisianians, the unique character of a state so proudly served by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana for 60 years.